Seahawks fans have got a lot to talk about right now because some of this news honestly feels bigger than people realize. There's excitement, there's concern, there's a little uncertainty, and depending on how this all plays out, we could be looking at some major changes around this franchise sooner than expected. And trust me, some of these updates are already getting fans divided. So stick with me all the way through this one because there's a lot to unpack here, and I want to know if you feel good about where things are heading or if this whole situation has you nervous too. And before we jump in, make sure to hit that like button and drop "Go Hawks" down in the comments, so I know the real Seahawks fans are in here with me today. Roger Goodell just delivered one of the biggest updates Seahawks fans have been waiting for, and it directly pushes back against a report that had many people in Seattle nervous about the future of this franchise. For weeks, there had been growing discussion surrounding the Seahawks sale process, especially after reports suggested there was only soft ownership interest in the organization. That immediately created concern among fans because when people hear that interest may not be strong, the fear becomes obvious. What happens if the Seahawks end up being sold to an ownership group that treats this franchise more like a business asset instead of a team obsessed with winning football games? That concern became even bigger because opportunities to purchase NFL franchises almost never happen. There are only 32 teams in the league, and according to Roger Goodell, the exact opposite of those reports appears to be true. Speaking during NFL meetings in Orlando, Goodell addressed the Seahawks ownership situation directly and made it clear that the amount of interest in the franchise has actually been tremendous. That changes the conversation in a massive way, because the fear among many Seahawks fans was never simply about the team being sold. The fear was always about who could potentially take over. When reports surfaced suggesting weak interest, it created a scenario where fans started wondering if the Seahawks could eventually end up with an ownership group unwilling to spend aggressively to build a contender. The comparison being made was not subtle either. There was concern about a future owner potentially treating the Seahawks more like a cost-cutting operation instead of doing everything possible to compete at the highest level. Now, with Goodell publicly stating that interest in the Seahawks is actually very strong, that should at least calm some of those fears. Multiple ownership groups are already being discussed publicly, and according to the information mentioned, there are currently at least 2 groups connected to possible bids. One is led by Wyc Grousbeck, while another is led by Vinod Khosla. That immediately creates another layer of discussion because Seahawks fans are already evaluating what kind of ownership group they would actually want leading this franchise into the future. The Grousbeck connection stands out because of his history with the Boston Celtics. The argument being made is simple. When he owned the Celtics, the organization won championships. That matters because Seahawks fans are not simply looking for someone with money. They are looking for someone willing to invest heavily in winning. At the same time, there is still uncertainty surrounding the process because Goodell also made it clear that this is not something expected to wrap up quickly. According to his comments, the process is still moving forward, but there is not much else the league is prepared to reveal publicly right now. Once the sale process eventually reaches completion, the NFL will then go through its approval process. And honestly, that timeline matters because it means Seahawks fans may be living with uncertainty around ownership for a long time. This may not be resolved quickly. It may continue developing over the next year or even longer. That is why another major topic suddenly became incredibly important in this discussion, and strangely enough, it involves the Portland Trail Blazers. The connection between the Trail Blazers and the Seahawks is impossible to ignore because both organizations were tied to Paul Allen and Jody Allen. Now that the Trail Blazers have reportedly been sold to Tom Dundon's group, fans in Seattle are watching very closely to see what happens when a new ownership group takes over a franchise previously connected to the Allen family. And what has happened so far in Portland has definitely created debate. According to the discussion, Dundon's ownership style has already frustrated many people connected to the Trailblazers organization. Several examples were brought up that immediately started generating backlash among fans. One complaint involved playoff T-shirts not being distributed to fans during postseason games. Another involved two-way players not traveling. There were also complaints about coaching decisions, business trip accommodations, and eventually layoffs inside the organization. For Seahawks fans watching this unfold from Seattle, it creates an uncomfortable question. What happens when the Seahawks eventually transition into a new era of ownership? Because no matter who purchases the franchise, one reality is unavoidable. The next ownership group will not operate exactly like Paul Allen did. That may be the hardest part for fans to process. Paul Allen built a reputation around aggressively supporting the organization and doing what was necessary to try to win football games. That became part of the identity fans associated with Seahawks ownership. So naturally, when stories begin surfacing about another former Allen-owned franchise experiencing layoffs, budget concerns, or operational changes under new ownership, people immediately start imagining similar scenarios happening in Seattle. But the situation also became more complicated when explanations behind many of those complaints started surfacing. According to Dundon's responses discussed in the report, some of the backlash may have come from operational differences rather than pure unwillingness to spend. For example, the issue involving playoff T-shirts reportedly stemmed from his hockey background with the Carolina Hurricanes, where towels are traditionally used instead. The issue involving two-way players reportedly came down to standard basketball practices that he was unfamiliar with. There was also discussion surrounding the layoffs within the Trailblazers organization. Dundon reportedly argued that the organization had become bloated and inefficient, particularly regarding staffing levels and sales performance. That does not automatically make fans feel comfortable, but it does highlight something important for Seahawks fans preparing for eventual ownership changes. Different does not automatically mean worse. That may end up becoming one of the biggest challenges once the Seahawks eventually transition to a new ownership group. Fans will likely compare every decision to how things operated under the Allen family. Some changes may immediately create criticism. Some may deserve criticism, but some changes may simply reflect a completely different management philosophy. And that is where this situation becomes incredibly delicate. Because Seahawks fans absolutely want ownership willing to spend aggressively on building a championship-level football team. Nobody wants a cheap ownership group cutting corners in ways that damage the organization. But at the same time, not every owner will have the same resources or operate with the exact same structure Paul Allen used. That uncertainty is exactly why Roger Goodell's comments about strong ownership interest matter so much. If interest in the Seahawks is truly tremendous, then theoretically the franchise should have the ability to attract ownership groups committed to winning at a high level, instead of simply viewing the Seahawks as another business investment. But while Seahawks fans continue watching the ownership story develop, another issue suddenly emerged involving Nolan Teasley. According to reports discussed from CBS and ESPN, the Minnesota Vikings have requested a second in-person interview with the Seahawks assistant general manager. That immediately creates concern because it means Seattle could potentially lose an important front office figure. What makes the situation even more interesting is that among the candidates reportedly being considered, Teasley is viewed as somewhat unique because he does not have long-standing ties to the Vikings organization. Even though he may still be considered a long shot for the position, the fact he advanced to another interview stage matters. And if he ultimately lands the job, Seattle would suddenly face another major adjustment during an already uncertain period surrounding ownership discussions. The timing would also make things difficult because the Vikings reportedly started their process relatively late, meaning Seattle would have to react late if Teasley ends up departing. So now Seahawks fans are watching multiple major developments at once. There is the ownership uncertainty. There are growing conversations about what kind of ownership philosophy Seattle could eventually have. There is the example unfolding in Portland, creating both fear and debate. And now there is also the possibility of losing a key front office executive to Minnesota. The biggest takeaway from all of this may simply be that the Seahawks are approaching a period of major transition, even if some of those changes have not officially happened yet. Roger Goodell's comments helped calm concerns about weak interest in the franchise, but they also confirmed something important. There are people actively preparing to potentially take control of one of the NFL's most valuable organizations. And when that moment finally comes, everything about the future direction of the Seahawks could begin changing. And now I want to hear from you, Seahawks fans. Do you trust the direction this franchise is heading with the ownership situation? Or are you still worried about what could happen next in Seattle? Drop your thoughts down in the comments, because this conversation is only getting started. And if you want non-stop Seahawks updates, breaking news, rumors, and exclusive coverage every single day, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now, leave a like on the video, and turn on notifications so you never miss anything happening with this team. And when you're done here, click the video on your screen because the next big Seahawks story is waiting for you there.